Hi, my name is Niels, co-founder of Dinghy Studio. As both a seasoned web developer and UI designer, I bridge the critical gap between design and development while leading our fully remote digital strategy team, helping organizations like yours create sustainable solutions that transform user experience into business success, especially as AI reshapes how we interact with technology. And today, I have Simeon Griggs with me on the podcast to speak about modern content management approaches that go beyond your current website's content. Simeon works for Sanity, the platform we use the most to set up content warehouses for our customers, as an educator to create the best possible experiences for content editors all across your organization. Warm welcome to Simeon. Thanks for taking the time, and let's get right into the interview.
Yeah, your setup looks far more professional than mine, so I'm jealous of yours.
Oh, I'm not sure if I agree, really. I mean, at least you have I think a lot better microphone. I honestly like the angle. Is your main screen in front of you, so to say?
Oh, I've got a big 30-something inch thing here, and my laptop's over here.
Okay.
The problem of what I'm working with is that my room, I can touch both sides of this wall if I go this way, and I could just about do it that way. So
really?
I'm in a phone box, basically.
But then you have a super wide angle lens or something?
Yes, yeah, I do, which then adds some weird distortion. It'll make things look huge if I put them in front of the camera.
Yeah, but you look fine. Who has I think a similar setup is this guy who actually runs Riverside. He has this video where he also did exactly like this. I can touch the back of my wall. It's so yeah. Simeon, thanks for joining the podcast today. For everyone who doesn't know Simeon, I mentioned it already a little bit in the intro, but so I think our paths crossed super lightly. We're a longer term customer of Sanity. We built websites using Sanity, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago already. It was our first approach into the headless world of content management, I would say. Simeon, for people who don't know you, and maybe also even the term headless content management systems, could you give us a little bit of an intro?
Yeah, for sure.
What we're talking about here.
Yeah, no worries. So, my name's Simeon. As you mentioned, I have been building websites for the longest time. Used to use WordPress back in the day. But my story coming to Sanity was literally that I used to work for a WordPress agency, and manager said to me, I hate WordPress. I want us to use something else. So I went out there and had a look at what was in the market. I found Sanity, and Sanity was literally everything I ever wanted WordPress to be. I just wanted advanced custom fields and custom post types, but as the whole platform. And I never wanted to touch a database or upload assets ever again. And Sanity did all those things. So it's no surprise that because I enjoyed it so much, finding it like that 2 years later, I end up joining the team here. So because it's as good as it was on that first day that I found it. So very excited to be at Sanity. I've been here about 3.5 years now, which is
wow.
I think it's the longest I've worked anywhere, incredibly, for a sustained period of time. So so that's Sanity is a headless CMS. Well, Sanity Studio, the way I like to say it, is a headless CMS. So it's just one app in the whole platform. But it allows you to separate away your applications from your content management interface. And then what Sanity does is it also goes one level deeper, where all your data storage is also separated from that content editing interface. And you deal with that in code. So I'm sure you didn't bring me on here to run a Sanity ad, but I've just run one because I just can't help myself.
No, it's not. It's not even a secret, really. Most of the projects that we're running since we actually I didn't start working for Sanity, but I had a similar experience. We used WordPress before, and I don't know, I built a whole bunch of websites, static websites using Jekyll and Hugo and whatever was out there back then. And I think for us, the defining moment was that we had a site that had so many pages that the Jekyll process took 5 minutes to just build this entire website. And we're there has to be a better way. This this is a little bit ridiculous now. And so we also went out for the hunt and stumbled upon Sanity. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, I think the move to headless was correct and has continued to be proven correct. But the move to static, I'm sort of glad that was a short-lived blip on the radar, and we're back to server-rendered responses and caching, and I think that makes a lot more sense. So Sanity gets to stay the same because it wasn't really all in on the static website generation. But I'm very happy to work with sort of server response based frameworks like Next.js is now primarily, and Remix and those sorts of ones as well.
Awesome. Hey, and since you mentioned it, also for you coming out of the WordPress universe, I'm sure that most of our listeners in organizations as small and medium and large have heard of WordPress, obviously. Half of the internet runs on WordPress. I guess that's even.
So they say, yeah.
So they say, exactly.
Does it feel like 40% of the websites you visit are on WordPress? That's what I always wonder. They say 40% of them are, but I wouldn't say 40% of the websites I go to.
Yeah, that's also
WordPress.
true.
I don't know.
Also
that's
depends on the site. Yeah. Exactly. And so, I mean, it's coming out of, for me, like my career started in the startup ecosystem of Berlin back then. Mm-hmm. And it was, I think today, it's still like a popular choice. Like somebody, maybe like an early stage startup venture, anything, they, from all of the choices to start their business website or their marketing landing page or whatever, I guess a popular option is to just get a template and start a WordPress website. And I think that's probably even a fine approach for some use cases. But if you had to describe the typical website running on Sanity, or like where you think it really starts to make sense to have all of your content in one place and not worry too much about how it's represented, but more to have it there and then to do stuff with it, like to attach a first website and a second, or, like what's the typical thing where you think it really makes sense for our customers?
Yeah, well, I think with the way that we've got starters now, particularly we've got a new template that runs on Next.js, and so much of the setup is automated. I think there would have been the stage where I would have said, look, if you're extremely early stage, I understand using WordPress, but now that we've just with one command line can set you up with a front end and a back end, and using Next.js, which, doesn't matter what your personal opinion is, it's by far the 800-pound gorilla in the room of front end. It's the most popular framework, and we can get you set up on that faster than ever now. So it is very easy to set that up. And I suppose what I'd say the difference is between a WordPress or something like that then and Sanity now is that with WordPress, you were constantly having to pull things out because it came with so much, but then so much would get in the way, and you'd install a plugin and it'd do two things that you wanted and one thing you didn't. And so you're constantly fighting the machine because it had so many opinions and so many options. Where with something like Sanity, you're only ever going to have in there what you want. So it's more like you've got the tools to build what you need, and it's less about just installing lots of things that are going to bring a lot of features that are going to do a lot of things that you don't need. It's more about building the system that suits your particular business and not trying to solve for every website or every blog online. So yeah, that'd be the big difference.
Yeah, I think that is also whenever we pitch the tech stack in a project to build a website ultimately, and we start to talk about the possibility of a headless content management system, and that you have all your stuff here, and then you can do the representation of it here and there, and you can use your content in other places than your website. I usually, at least with the business decision makers, I get the raised eyebrow, and they're like, but this sounds very complicated. Like, why would we do this?
Yeah, well, I guess it does begin to sound more complicated if you're speaking about like a hypothetical or an imagined future. Like it's difficult to imagine, the day when you've got 6 different apps in production, they all need content. Like that sounds far-fetched and far-flung. So maybe that's going too far. But certainly I think what helps is to talk about, and I'm not telling you how to sell Sanity websites, but I have done that for quite some time as well myself too. But I think it's helpful really to talk about you are modeling the business, not the website. And that's going to be the big benefit. So if in a WordPress or a typical headless CMS, you are modeling things like staff or office locations or products, you might be actually representing those as pages. And so everything's a page. And I remember once having a conversation with somebody that said, I tried Sanity and we put 5,000 documents in it and I couldn't find anything. And so we talked about what was the content model that you made, and everything was a page. Literally every type of content they'd made as a web page. And so, of course, it's going to be very difficult to work with content or reason about content. But what we're talking about with structured content is a digital representation of a physical thing. So a person and an office location and a product and a category and a blog post, these are all individual, disparate pieces of content. Some of them have relationships one to another. But I think that's the big benefit when we talk about moving to something other than a traditional CMS is we are talking about modeling your content as it relates to your business, and we're modeling real things that exist in the physical world. We're not just building a CMS so that 2 years from now, when you redesign the homepage, you have to rebuild the entire CMS again. And then 2 years later, when you do it again, you have to rebuild the CMS again. Ideally, you set up on Sanity once and you continue to grow on that platform because you're only ever modeling real things.
Exactly. And by now, since we've been using it for a couple of years now, and we did have the first examples of websites where we could just easily decide to put on a new front end or to even change the, like all of that. And the customers, like I told them back then, like along the lines of what you just said too, that we won't have to touch the system. And they were, I think they were like, yeah. Cool, or whatever.
Heard that promise before.
Yeah. And I think maybe they didn't even concern themselves so much about it or whatever, you know, or couldn't imagine what this means. But now we could come along and just say, yeah, that's fine. We just work on the front end and you can keep doing whatever you're doing. And they're like, really? I mean, yes, this is exactly the entire point. But so would you say the paradigm shift from thinking in pages to objects that or like entities in your organization, is that what breaks people's brains the most when you get into this model?
I think it can do. Like it's trying to elevate the conversation. And this is something that's been a real big part of what I've tried to push for with the educational efforts. And I know it's something that a lot of us have pursued here at Sanity. And that is to bring the conversation beyond just the developer setting up an application and more so trying to involve everybody in an organization who works with the content, because that content drives the business and everybody is involved with it. Everybody that is going to publish content onto any of those applications is going to be involved in the authoring of that content. So, pushing the thoughts from developers to think about their customers or to think about those content creators is a big part of the focus. So we've got courses on Sanity Learn, our learning platform there, all about trying to get all the right people in the room before you've written a line of code, before you've opened Figma. Like get the right people in the room, get people who understand the organization and its entities in the same room, talk to the people who are already using the current CMS and what are the current challenges that they're facing. How can we draw out a content model that better represents the business and not represents the website? And how do we involve them through the authoring process? In the Day One with Sanity Studio course, we set up a Sanity Studio. And then in the next lesson, at the very top of the lesson, I say, we set this up with the defaults. It's horrible. We need to do way better. And I want to be very clear about that is like to think about, let's go beyond just setting up an app and then handing off to the editors at the end of the project and sending them the final invoice, and which they log on and say, thanks, I hate it. Like, well, what have you done? Get them involved earlier, consider what they need, what validation rules will help them, what descriptions on fields will help them. And so, yeah, just thinking a bit beyond ourselves as developers and thinking more about, with empathy, about the people who are going to be using the content editing system that we're building, but also those who are going to be consuming the content as well. I think that sort of, it elevates us in the role by involving more people who are actually going to deal with the content over its life cycle.
Now, this is super interesting to me that you frame it this way, also as your role being the developer on projects like this, to look beyond the tellerrand, so to say, like how does this project even fit inside of the whole organization? And I think why this vibes with me so well, and I think honestly, without ever having said it so clearly, I think this is why we really love working with the platform that you put together, because Dinghy came out of building websites for people in this very traditional way, like how it was done 10 years ago, right? Like the customer calls, wants a website. They don't have any content. They don't have any pictures. They don't have anything. They just...
It's always the last thing at the project.
Right?
Yep. No,
and you have this classical waterfall of, I want a pretty website and here's my logo. Enjoy. And then you start designing without content, which is always horrible. Yeah. And you start to implement the design on WordPress or whatever. And then the customer ends up in this situation where they said, oh yeah, we're going to work on the content so we can get this a little bit cheaper and we want to be in control anyway. And so they have this website then, which is empty. And they realize in the moment where we're proudly handing off our brilliant work that they're now actually at the beginning of their journey. Like they bought a shiny tool now, but it doesn't do anything without them now really investing effort on their part. And so one story that we've been telling for 2 or 3 years now that started with the realization that we have to break up this process somehow, because if we continue doing it this way, it will always create this frustrating experience in the end. And for us, this started to get the perspective of a UX researcher and to start to challenge what customers actually wanted from us. I started to not just take orders, so to say, and to say, why are we building this website? Who are we building this website for? What do you want your customers to do on your website? And all of this sort of conversation relates to what you're saying too, right? We enjoy building the website because, well, we're web developers and that's fine. But no one from a business context really, I think, enjoys having a website as just for the sake of having a website.
A necessary evil.
Right? And so to break up this conversation and involve everyone in the success of a digital platform, which is essentially what they're making, I think we also had this experience that this creates this huge buy-in. Because all of a sudden, everybody has this IKEA effect where they're like, oh, I worked on that, so I'm happy to back this now. And I'm in it. I'm part of this project and I'm happy to chip in. And so this is a super powerful approach. And the way that Sanity works is very supportive of this process, I would say,
Yeah. Well, that's really great to hear. I mean, I'm sure it shows through in the product, but the company was founded by people that, I know it sounds like flowery marketing, but they do love content and they love the process of it. And they were website builders too. It's the irony of us telling people don't build your own CMS. Our founders built a CMS, but they built the last CMS that should ever have to be built. Essentially, Sanity is a toolbox for people that, should build CMS-like experiences on. But yeah, there was always a great motivation and a drive to build great content experiences. And so and this elevated conversation to take it beyond just building websites for hire. Another thing that we're thinking about at the moment too is about the life cycle of content, the journey of content. As you accurately say, often it's, we need content for this website. Yes, I'll get it to you just before launch. And how long ago was that quote, content precedes design in the absence of content's just decoration? It was that 15, 20 years ago at this point. That was a popular statement and it's still true and it still happens. I was very excited to recently, we're redesigning our homepage at the moment and I made sure I wrote all the content very early and handed it to the designer. We'll probably change it and everything, but he didn't start from zero. And so I was happy to hand that over. But yes, the whole platform was created with care by people that understood the challenges of working with content and that cared deeply about content delivery problems and content creation problems. And yeah, that should show through every part of the product.
Yeah. I was looking forward to talking to you today, just after a workshop that we had yesterday in Berlin with a new customer where they were already working with a very creative agency, a lot of 3D animations and artsy stuff and going around. And we get called in, I think more or less as the UX police. They were having this void in the middle, making all of these very creative things, but they had a hard time getting the user journeys down and so on. And so in this specific project, they are sort of making yearly editions of what they're putting out. So they're always making a new website that's similar to the one before, but they have yearly seasons, so to say. And our pitch to them yesterday was, look, to not get into this waterfall, we'll use this content warehouse that we set up. For this workshop today, we want to understand what are the different what are the objects that we're talking about? What do we need to store in this? Somebody's going to write something, somebody's going to render fancy animations. And then it would be cool to to be able to work in parallel. So somebody can code, somebody can make 3D images, somebody can text, and somebody can work on the website. And the way that we're going to do that is with this warehouse, so to say. Like we just define what sort of content we're going to put in here, and then all of us can just go on here. Is this usually how how you also start a project? Or like, could you describe your approach to like a bigger website setup like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I've started a greenfield project. It's always usually sort of attaching to something that's already in existence. I suppose I can speak to, like I just alluded to, we're looking at redesigning our homepage at the moment, and it looks fantastic, and there'll be a new version of it up soon. But what we have with our existing studio is a lot of existing entities. So things like customer logos and case studies and these sorts of things. We have those already stored as case studies and as customers and quotes and this sort of thing. And so having those stored as entities allows us to, yes, we can create a brand new schema type for like this brand new homepage. We could call that document type, homepage February 2025, because it's so unique. It's only ever going to be shown this one time. But we can then still build references out to long lasting content like, this new homepage, unique, distinct, one-off document still needs to reference that customer story, which was written 3 years ago and is still relevant today. It still links to this customer logo, that might be relatively new. So as long as you still have as many entities stored as entities as possible, then yeah, if you are creating one-off piece of content, because there's always going to be singletons, right? Limited edition releases. You're only going to have a fall release once. You're only going to have like a summer 2025 sale once. So there are still cases where you are going to need short-lived content like that sort of thing. But so long as you have individual disparate entities for those pieces to be able to reference, then it means that this new homepage can reference that existing customer story, but so can other customer stories. So can, your customer story index. So can a blog post that's going to accompany that customer story. So I hope that answers the question, but that's sort of where my mind's at the moment based off of what we're currently working on. But yeah, the admin studio that we have for all of our Sanity content, which stores documentation, marketing, all of these different pieces of content, it all sits there so that we can just draw from it. And I mean, this homepage is also going to link to one of the courses on Learn. It's going to link to the documentation. It's going to link to templates. Like those are all individual pieces of content which are going to be referenced from this one-off new homepage.
Awesome. Okay, so I have two bigger questions that I just thought about. As you mentioned that you didn't start a greenfield project in a while. First of all, would you agree that Sanity is maybe something for bigger organizations, or is this not even true? Like, this is at least the way I think about it. But with your starter example, in the beginning, I was actually starting to doubt that.
I think we could scale up from 0 to 100 quite simply. So, and certainly that's the direction. Some of our new releases that you'll see over the next few months are definitely are going to be fantastic, because we've got huge organizations that have dozens of studios across teams that are all around the world, and so for them, we've got tools to improve that experience for them. But you could still run your personal blog, and I do, on a Sanity Studio, and that's still going to do a great job as well. So no, I don't think there's really any size constraint, and that's why we've still got the free plan, right? Like I get that that's a curious thing with a lot of SaaS startups, because so many people have been burned so many times by free plans that start off free and exciting and then go away. But we've been so generous for so long with that free plan, and really the community is still very much at the heart of everything that we do. No, I think it's still a great fit for a very small project, so you get a taste, but it can continue to expand. So the last greenfield project I created with Sanity that is now a much bigger thing was Sanity Learn itself. That was just, I needed a place to put some training content that I was writing, because I was running workshops with agencies and customers, and I just needed somewhere for that to go. So I put it all into a Sanity Studio. Then I built a front end for it. Then I was running workshops off of this front end. And then at some point I sort of got a tap on the shoulder and just told, would you just like to do that as your job here? Running this learning platform. So I was in the solution engineering before that, but then, this whole educator thing became self-evident. And then I took that whole learning studio, took all that content, and we just merged it into the main studio with all of our other content, so that now it can reference docs, and so that docs can reference Learn. And so those things are now combined. So that was my last greenfield project, and it's now part of a much larger project, and it benefits from that, right? Because again, you get strong referential integrity between those two entities, right? When you put them in the same studio like that.
Nice. My first bigger question would be, let's say you have like a bigger mid-sized organization and they have like a huge website, like with a lot of stuff, HR and press and a blog and a million things. And they're on like any sort of legacy system that they are actually not happy with themselves. Do you have like a hot tip of how would you approach getting them onto Sanity? Like, is this like one big bang with migration scripts, or is this like piece by piece? How would you approach that?
So the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And so you've really got to take it that way. I do have a migration course on Sanity Learn, actually, that speaks. I've got one course about like what's the philosophy behind how you should approach a migration. And then there's a technical course on like how to actually write a migration script. And then there's a whole course dedicated to how to migrate off of WordPress, because that in particular is something that you should do. But yeah, I think what we see a lot of people do, if they've got an absolutely enormous website, is go and take some pretty boring content first and move that to Sanity. So your terms and conditions pages, or your security policy, privacy policy, and those sorts of ones, get those pages on the Sanity just so you get a taste of what it's like to set up a schema type, to work in that studio, to set up your deployment pipeline, all those sorts of things. So if you do it in stages like that, then the risk is much lower. And so that's from that sort of philosophy or that theory side of things, is like how you should approach it. And again, make sure you work with your authors. What do they like about the system? What do they not like? There's every chance that even though, say, that customer is on Joomla, right?
Yeah.
No one likes Joomla. But here's the thing.
3 or something. That's very popular in Germany.
But here's what you need to keep in mind as a developer. Like, we like shiny new, right?
Yes.
But even though Joomla's terrible, and those content creators might currently think it's terrible, it's familiar to them. And so if you give them something unfamiliar, they likely will hate the unfamiliar more than the horrible thing they already know.
Yes.
So it's really important. That's why it's important to get the author in to say, hey, we're looking at using this thing. It's called Sanity Studio. It's much faster. It's much lighter. I know it's different, but here's how it works. And so really bringing them on the journey, making sure they have appropriate guardrails with how they use things, make sure you've got validation rules and descriptions, all those little things that are going to make their life easier, so that when you show them, here's the new CMS, you're essentially protecting them from themselves. And I sort of mount this argument quite a lot to developers, because a lot of developers we speak to, they love Sanity, but they're not using it at work. And so sort of my encouragement then is like, well, you need to get better at selling it at work, right? Yes. So if you want to use Sanity at work and you're currently not, then you need to get better at selling it, which means you need to do a better job of communicating it to everybody else who might be using it. And so doing a better job of working with and having empathy for the people who will be using that platform day by day is really important. I've sort of gone off tangent there, but yeah, essentially moving bit by bit, that's probably the best way to do it. If that's a possibility, is that you can replace things in flight. And so maybe the CMS is pulling from two sources for a while. But also too, if you are going to script migrations, to make sure that they are idempotent is sort of key. So to make sure that you can keep running those migrations, and it won't duplicate content. And that's easy to do with, a number of things. You can set stable IDs when you write content into Sanity. You can write really powerful migration scripts. But yeah, essentially what you should be able to do is just write this great migration script that over time, every time you write it, it's just grabbing the latest content from that source and putting it into Sanity. And so that, yeah, on the last day that you need to run that script one last time, you run it one last time, all and of that old content, it's in there. Switch. And then that's it. Yeah, switch over.
Awesome. I think, but one of my bigger experience, I would say, or learnings from the last years running a small UX studio. I guess even with the rise of Gen AI tools more and more, the people outside of the tech world have the feeling that code is becoming more of a commodity. Like, I'm not even sure that I agree, to be honest. Like, I mean, yeah, we can generate a whole bunch of stuff, but then you're sitting on a whole bunch of generated stuff that you don't understand. So at least tread lightly, I would say, like use it in an informed way. But so I have the feeling that most of the time when it comes to digital transformation in general, like with whole organizations, and like I'm attaching to this point where you're saying, like, get the people in the room, like have them understand the change and don't just park them in front of a new solution and say, yeah, enjoy. I made this amazing thing for you without even asking if you want it or not.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, because I think implementation is a hard problem, sure. But I think to get people along and on board, and communication in general, is sometimes even the harder challenge. So I would say my next question is, would you go department by department? For example, would you make it somehow related to the user group of who you're trying to onboard next?
I mean, you could go too granular. It depends on the size of the customer, obviously. Sure, you don't want to be so so interruptive that you're getting in the way. I suppose you need to find out who the real decision maker is. It's interesting that you frame this question in line of the rise of generative AI tools and this sort of thing, that it's true. It's never been easier to write code. I mean, because you're literally not writing code anymore. I've been working with Cursor Composer the last 2 days. Yesterday and this morning. And I've had that moment where sadly, it's like the AI guys were right. We're not going back. And because I'm using voice dictation now to write the prompts. And so essentially I'm just talking to Cursor and it's building an app. And
Interesting.
I'm not writing code anymore. And it's the most amazing, productive coding experience I've ever had in my life. So, which really sucks. I love writing code. And I'm so mad for a couple. I'm mad that I don't get to write code anymore. But I'm also mad that all those AI hype bros online were right. So
yeah, that's also true.
It's been a really tough pill to swallow this morning. But the point is that, and has always been with all the AI stuff, is that the value wasn't in writing code in what we do. The value was in problem solving. So
exactly. And
you were going to find problems when you talk to people. And you wouldn't have found those problems if you were focused on, well, I've got to get this optimistic UI, 50 milliseconds faster, or I've got to get this 3D shader model, this spinning globe, a bit more performant. Those weren't problem solving questions. So I try not to get too grandiose, but I do think about the role of educating people of Sanity. It is in part, yes, I want you to use Sanity and I want you to use them the best way possible, but also, again, getting back to that, if you want to use it at work, if you want to better your career, you're going to need to learn how to be a better problem solver or a better listener, those sorts of things. So problem solving is really the key. But also, while we're still on generative AI, and when I just can't help myself but pitch Sanity, is there's never been a better time to use a CMS that's configured with code. So
absolutely,
some of the other headless platforms where you set up your schema types with drop downs and select boxes and dashboards, and that would take forever. Where now with Cursor, I'm like, hey, here's my Sanity schema, but I'm building this and just generate a whole bunch more. So having a platform that's all configured in code and increasingly configured in code is going to be the best tool to use with these AI tools for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
So setting up Sanity Studio should be like a 30-second thing.
Exactly.
Not like a day of setting up schema types, but hey, just set this up. And then if you've set up your studio that quickly, well, then now you've got X amount of time to actually problem solve.
Yeah. And that's, I think, so coming out of this workshop yesterday, this is where people got really excited that somebody said to them, look, next steps, we're going to work on wireframes. Old and boring, because we have to make an inventory of we have to form this idea of where we're going, and we need a whiteboard on this. But what we're doing in parallel, because we already figured out the entities and objects and what's the universe that we're talking about, we're going to have our content warehouse running before we're done with the wireframes. And you can start to put stuff in there from the last years, from this year, from whatever. Go nuts, drop all of that stuff in there, because then you don't have to do it in 3 months' time when we're, ready with the website and we let you work now. So, and they looked at me when I said that, was are you serious? I'm like, yeah, because that's not the issue, this is, as you say, I just know that I can just come in, define 10 different document types with the attributes that we collected with the customer, and just have them work in it and have the first experience and do stuff I think we're missing an attribute. Can we add the year property? And I'm like, sure, why not?
And my big takeaway with customers, and I know every time I'm a customer myself, I feel the exact same way, is that I think everybody only knows what they don't want. And so now that we can put something in front of someone even faster. So like if where previously you would have said, look, I'll set up a Sanity Studio and then you can try it, but that would be, tomorrow I'll send it to you. But if we could say, hey, let's just generate with code a studio right now and let me know what you think. Let me know how this feels. Once you can get to that prototyping stage in 30 seconds instead of a day, that's pretty powerful to be able to get feedback and immediately start visualizing what works and what doesn't.
You gave me a very good pitch idea right now. All right. So maybe last but different topic, if you have a couple more minutes. So and I think it's maybe even a little bit more, I don't know, philosophical, but maybe a little bit more abstract. So I had this conversation with a customer where we were working on something marketing, not even super related, but they started to remind me that they have their website. Sure, that's fine. But then they also have their customer success thing going on a platform called Help Scout, which is, I think, something like Zendesk or whatever. And they're thinking of picking up Notion for mostly internal documentation, but they're planning to use the publish to web feature a little bit to put out some articles. And then they also have like a technical API documentation using Docusaurus, like this platform. And so I started to list all of those web properties in my head, and I thought, like, hold on. Like, this doesn't sound good. Like, this sounds like you're fine now as you're 10 people or whatever. But what's this going to do to your organization in 5 years? And then I pitched the idea of putting all of that in one warehouse, and then we can still decide if the docs should be on their own website or not. And the question they came back with that I didn't have the best answer that I wanted to ask you what you think is... So they said, well, that sounds awesome. That sounds awesome to have it all in one place. They totally got behind that idea. And they said, well, but sometimes we buy SaaS platforms like Zendesk, for example, just because it's a more popular example, because they have stuff, they have features that we would otherwise have to build ourselves. So like an AI chatbot that goes into the knowledge base and fetches articles. So you might not even have to create this support ticket or something. Yeah. And so I think even, related to the notion of that making your own things is becoming easier because of Gen AI. Do you have thoughts on this, universe of buying SaaS platforms that roughly do what you want and try to put them together versus the custom approach? Or is it even a custom approach,
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to know with the whole generative AI thing because it's never been faster to scaffold an app, a brand new app that is exactly what you want. But is that something that you want to maintain forever? But then I wonder, will the AI get so good that essentially the AI can maintain the app? And so that question's moot, right? But then at that point, if the AI why doesn't the AI just do the whole job?
Exactly.
So that's hard to know. I'll sort of answer that by saying it is funny sometimes the use cases that come to Sanity and it's like, well, can I build this in Sanity? Like, I don't want to use Zendesk. I want to build a support panel in Sanity, and can I do that? And so, something I've said in a lot of conversations before is that the answer is always yes, because it is flexible enough to build whatever experience you want with Sanity. It's a matter of, again, time and resources. Do you want to pursue building that in a platform that wasn't necessarily designed for it, but is a document storage with form editing? So why couldn't it be used for that? And we are in the process of exposing some new utilities, which I've been playing with this morning, which we'll release in a few months, that are going to make it easier than ever to build custom experiences using Sanity content, which is just phenomenal. So it's probably never been a better time to build a custom experience if that's what you want. But we're also too conscious of that there's a lot of experiences people want without having to build it. So we've got tasks. We've got comments. Before we had comments, there were teams that would build comments into the studio because the studio was always flexible enough to do that sort of thing. So you could just build your own commenting solution. Yeah. But really, you shouldn't have to. So yeah, we're always on the lookout for, what are the most common ways people are augmenting Sanity to do the thing they want? And then how can we either make that easier for everyone, or how can we just provide an opinionated solution to do it? So yeah, I get the idea of building dedicated services for dedicated things. That makes a lot of sense to me. But what's really exciting is increasingly Sanity is becoming an even better platform for making whatever customer experience you want on there, so long as what you need is like document storage and editing and assets. But also too, we're always mindful of if this is what the market wants, or this is what most people are using Sanity for, then we'll make sure that we've got that. And comments and tasks, and there's some other examples of this coming down the line as well of, we're constantly paying attention to our customers and working out then, well, what would everybody benefit from if we just made that ourselves?
That sounds super exciting. Like, is this generally, do you mean to extend the studio experience or outside of the studio?
Yes. So
both.
there's going to be a part of our next release, which is going to be so much better for building experiences inside the studio and around it, which, as someone who's developed an awful lot of plugins for the studio and then had to sort of build a lot of my own machinery for things like I want to make a fetch, but I want it to be constantly updating. I want to make an edit to a document, but I want to create a draft if it doesn't exist yet. And if it does, I want to edit the published document. Like all of those sorts of complexities that I've had to recreate in my time making plugins, we can get rid of that. But then also too, being responsive to changes. So like we've got Grok-powered webhooks we've had for quite a while. Sort of what's the next evolution of that look like, so that you can actually take action. So a document got edited. What can we do after, outside of the studio to better that experience? So both in the studio and out of the studio, we want to really increase the scope of what you can do with Sanity content.
The last thing that you said ties into something, that we discussed in this call that I had with the customer at that point, where I said, look, so one thing that we're going to sort of get out of the gate without you even having to do anything, or you get it sort of for free, is, let's say we take all of your customer support articles essentially and move them over into your existing Sanity Studio. So we just move that all of that over there. And what you get for free, because we have the front end that already understands what's how to get content from Sanity, is that we can pretty easily recreate the experience for customers to read support articles. That's easy. We have a blog. It's not a lot different than surfacing customer support articles for different products or to categorize them and do all of that stuff. And so since we get that for free, and since that is sort of something that you're saving in effort because you don't have to manage the second platform, what we could do is to take that freed up budget, so to say, to attach specific features that we maybe don't code ourselves. So webhooks or Grok-powered webhooks in that sense, to know when content changed inside of your content warehouse would enable something like external search index or feeding your own little LLM that's sitting somewhere that's powering a chatbot or something. So with all of the available APIs, we could also attach more granular, smaller, but existing solutions to our ecosystem. Yeah. Is this something that comes up sometimes? I don't know, is this a common thing? And
it can do. So that sort of reacting to content, and I mentioned before that we're always conscious of the life cycle of content, right? So it's not just published and forgotten about, but it was drafted at some point somewhere. It was commented on, it was reviewed, it was validated, it was published, and then once it was published, it might have gone off to other services. Then it was revised after the fact and published again. And so having actions take place after a document's published. So a small one to me is, because I write an awful lot of guides and guidance as well, I'm always conscious of making sure I'm updating, a milestone updated at date, so that people can see when they look at my Next.js guide, it's actually updated. I guess I wrote it for the first time 4 years ago, but it's actually been significantly updated for the latest version of Next.js. So you're just constantly thinking about the life of content, and that's where, having an automated webhook set up to make sure that it gets re-indexed in Algolia or some external service, or gets re-summarized by AI. So maybe you've got something which is summarizing the document after it's been published, but then if you make a significant change to the document, then you should have it re-indexed or re-summarized. So definitely, there's lots of use cases for things that should happen after something has happened to the document. And I think Grok-powered webhooks, they're so cool, but I swear they're maybe the most underutilized, coolest part of the platform. There is really so much you could do with them. They're very, very clever.
We're actually, we do have the Algolia example. We're not using Algolia in that project, but TypeSense, but it works just like a charm. Like whenever a document updates, it just is sent over, re-indexed, and the search function is like, we don't have to do anything. Like that setup is just running for 3 years now. And that's, very cool. I'm very excited really that we have all of these possibilities now and that we're kind of moving out of this, just go and rent all of the SaaS platforms and kind of, match them together the closest that you can. But we can actually, with good conscience, for smaller and smaller organizations, I would say, like that is sort of the progression, that it becomes more accessible for smaller organizations with tighter budgets, that we make it possible to compose all of these existing solutions together, but to make this more unified platform in the end. It doesn't have these breakpoints in the middle where people start to copy paste stuff again, right?
Or isn't so overly opinionated about how it should be used, right? So while the majority of people do use Sanity as a CMS for their website, and that's a totally valid use case, we've got all sorts of weird and bizarre use cases because people need general data storage and a way to edit documents or like a real-time database. So there's all sorts of different benefits. So using Sanity as a backend is definitely a really extremely useful use case. And so then it potentially taking the place of other SaaS platforms is totally reasonable.
Awesome. Simeon, thanks so much for coming on. Like I think we can do this again sometime. I have like a long list of questions, but I think for today, that's probably enough.
Yeah, maybe when I'm allowed to talk about some of the things I dropped hints about today. I don't know.
Yes.
Too much cat out of the bag today, but we'll see if I'm still at Sanity in a few months. So then we can talk again.
Simeon, you were not allowed to share all of that.
Well, you got the scoop.
Yeah, totally. And also, I mean, like my co-founder, Dan, he's also started to do stuff like grab all of our content, chuck that into his local something language model to start to query our blog content, which is very interesting stuff that you can do. And it's so easy. Like I think he did it in an afternoon.
Yeah.
And now we can ask our content questions like, why should a company hire a UX researcher? And it comes back and tells you why with references to the blog post where we talked about that. And I think that's super mind blowing that you can interact with your content that way, where the prerequisite is, of course, that it's all in one place. Right?
I've seen, just this morning, I saw somebody launching a new SaaS product, which is sort of jumping through hoops to turn SaaS documentation into something that can be consumed by LLMs, where I know that's just something that we set up in Sanity Learn the other day. And we're launching a blog post recently because, when you've got the data in a format and in a structure where you can do whatever you want, I mean, we render it into HTML, but if we just want to have a route that renders all of the Sanity Learn courses on one screen, all written in Markdown,
exactly,
which LLMs like, we can do that. So, if you've got content in the right format first, you don't have to jump through hoops having AI rewrite all the content.
Cool. Exciting future. I love being a web developer still, even if we can just code by talking.
It's exciting and terrifying at the same time.
I agree. I could not agree more. Thanks again so much for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation, and maybe see you on the next one.
Likewise. Thanks, Nils.
All right. Bye.
Bye.